Not my first sermon, okay? I was yelling and hacking on the couch watching him last Sunday, going, that wasn't my first sermon. But yes, we both thought I was getting fired when I was preaching on that dumpster. We had a blast together, and Andy and I have been friends since we were kids. Our dads were in Royal Rangers. Our dads were our Pioneers commanders. If you know what Royal Rangers is, it's like Christian Boy Scouts, but way better. And anyway, we have grown up together, love working together. And Andy was the lead pastor in Forks, Washington for a long time. And now that he serves in our district office as our assistant superintendent, he doesn't get to preach as often as he used to. And so when I called him, I was like, hey, I'm dying. I need you to take Sunday. Would you preach for me? He's like, yes, I will preach. I have a sermon ready now. And he was super excited. So I was very excited to see that and very thankful. We have an amazing team. Pastor Chris was out sick. Pastor Tyler was out sick. Our family was out sick. And we were just like so grateful for the many people who jumped in and love our church so deeply because of that. Before I jump into our series today, I did have to share an announcement. I do have some sad news. Our beloved friend, Victoria McNeely, did go home to be with the Lord on Sunday last week after battling a lot of severe health issues. Her family is trying to figure out how to get the memorial taken care of as soon as possible. It is this Tuesday, February 11th, right here at the Maltby campus at 3 p.m. If you are able to make that as church family, you are invited to come and celebrate her life and just love on the McNeelys. And so if you would be able to do that, that would be a great thing as well. So I just want to let you all know Victoria McNeely's memorial will be Tuesday this week on the 11th, right here at 3 p.m. That said, we are jumping into a new series. For those of you guys who've heard me preach a while, you know that I love to just preach through the Bible. I'm nothing fancy. I wear flannel and I preach the Bible. Look at that. And we have gone through a doctrinal series recently in January, preaching about the full gospel and things like that. And now I'm jumping back into another book of the Bible. And we have not been in the Old Testament for a little while. So we're going to go through a book in the Old Testament that I absolutely love. It is the one book in the Bible where God is never mentioned, except he's there the entire time. And that is the book of Esther. Do you guys have your Bibles this morning? If you do, you can raise them up because we're going to jump in. We love this thing cover to cover. And you can just say with me, I love God's word. It feeds me. It guides me. It directs me. I got it already marked. You can open up your Bible to the book of Esther. And as you're finding your spot there, I want to give you a little bit of background about Esther. You see, in the year 586 BC, so this is about almost 600 years before Jesus has been born, Israel was a kingdom. It was a divided kingdom. They had split up. King Solomon's son, Rehoboam, was a total jerk, didn't listen to his dad's advisors, and the kingdom split. And then it has a southern kingdom of Judah and a northern kingdom of Israel, and they kind of split off and do their own thing. And the northern kingdom, they have like 10 of the tribes of Israel, and they're kind of doing whatever. And the southern kingdom is mostly Judah. That's why they say Jew a lot, because it was the kingdom of Judah, and that's where Jerusalem was, and they still had the temple, and they follow all these things. And we've even got a screen working again. Somebody prayed over it. Praise God. And for generations, these kingdoms kind of worked parallel, and eventually the Assyrian Empire that existed in the year 712 BC, they take over the northern kingdom, and everybody gets scattered amongst the Assyrian Empire, and then geopolitical stuff happens. The Assyrians kind of wane, and this other empire starts to build up called the Babylonians, and then they become super powerful, and about 150 years later, in 586, the Babylonians come and take over the southern kingdom of Judah. You guys follow me on the timeline? Okay. So that has happened. And this guy, he's got like the coolest name. His name is Jeremiah. He prophesies. He's actually a member of the royal family. He's a prophet, and he's prophesying. He's called the crying prophet because he cries a lot. And it's because he's constantly lamenting, actually, about the fall of the kingdom of Judah. And he says, you know what, though? You guys are going to be in exile for 70 years. And what these ancient empires would do, the Romans did this, the Greeks did this, the Persians did this, the Assyrians did this. And what they would do is it was a defense mechanism. It was a defense mechanism is they would take, when they would conquer a people group, they would disperse them, all of their royal class and their artisans and their craftsmen and everybody that could basically help hold the society together, and they would just spread them out amongst their empire. So it was really hard for that people group to unify again, because you're mixed with other people with different language, different ethnicities, different religious beliefs, and it made it really difficult to unify and then rise up against the power that had conquered you. The difference as well is that a lot of times they would say, and hey, go ahead and integrate into our new society. And that was a way that they would use that to debilitate anybody that they conquered. And this is what happened to the Jews as well. But the Jews held on to their identity. They held on to the promise because Jeremiah said, hey, after 70 years, you guys are going to make it back. And so 70 years had passed. And if you continue reading chronologically through the Bible, you get to these two books called Ezra and Nehemiah. Actually, in the Hebrew Bible, they're one book. And these guys begin to get to go back. And Nehemiah reestablishes the wall, and Ezra helps rebuild the temple that has been destroyed, and all these things, and they're rebuilding their city. And in the middle of Ezra chapter 6 and Ezra chapter 7, there's a 58-year gap in between those two chapters, chronologically. And that is where the story of Esther happens. Jerusalem has been destroyed, and it's slowly being rebuilt. And there's this new kingdom of Persia raising up after the Babylonians. And there's this king named Xerxes. That's his Greek name. And this is a king, a Persian king who's battling a lot with the Greeks. And there's all this historical stuff happening. And in the middle of all of that, this short little story happens. And that's where we get to Esther chapter 1. You guys ready to jump in together? Let's do it. We're going to read about a tale of two queens today. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. That's basically Egypt, to give you an idea. Egypt, Ethiopia area. Big empire. I've even got a map up there. Can you guys show me the map real quick? Check that out. So here is his empire. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet to all the nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes of the nobles of the provinces were present. The action, this is actually probably, if you line the timeline up, this is probably a banquet for the major victory against the Greeks in Thermopylae, where the Persians burned the city of Athens in the second Greco-Persian invasion. This is one of the largest ancient army invasions ever assembled, with somewhere between 120 to 300,000 soldiers from Persia. So it's not a small empire. This is an insanely humongous army. This is also the same battle where the movie 300 comes from, where the guy's on the scene, he's like, there's blood everywhere. And that's where 300 Spartans held off thousands of Persians. The Spartans did lose, they did die. But that's where that movie actually comes from. That battle is a part of this war. And he's very likely, King Xerxes is celebrating his big victory. However, real history records that the Persians were decimated by a vastly larger force. But this is actually the opening scene, is the feast celebration of the end of that war. If you look at the timeline lining up. You guys with me? All right, here we go. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and the glory of his majesty. And when the days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people, from the least to the greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden and hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material, to silver rings on marble pillars. They're going into great detail to show this was a beautiful and big banquet. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry marble, mother of pearl and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. This 180-day display of the empire's wealth and splendor, it's to give you an idea. This is the party of parties. It is the pomp and splendor, and the king is just showing off. Extravagance, decadence, decorations, luxury, furnishings, all these describes. And the guests are served in golden vessels. There's no restriction on any of the drinking. It's not like, oh, don't have enough. And then later, the queen also holds a banquet. It says, Queen Vashti, verse 9, also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. It was actually uncommon for the queen to present herself in a type of a party like this in front of everyone else, because the queen existed for the king alone, to give you this idea. So she's got her own party going on as well. But this is what happens. Verse 10. On the seventh day, when King Xerxes was high in spirits from wine. That's a really nice way to say he was really drunk. I love it how people think the Bible is like so calm and proper and prim. It's like, no, he was sloshed, you guys. He was out there. He commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him. And remember, a eunuch is someone who has had their reproductive abilities disconnected. We'll put it that way. And they oftentimes are the ones who worked with the queen and the king's harem and all of that. And it's a way to know for sure no funny business was going to happen. And this was very common in ancient days. King Xerxes was high in spirits on wine, and he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, and I can't pronounce all their names, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbana, Bigtha, Abagatha, I can't say it, Zether, and Carcass, that's an unfortunate name, to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and the nobles, for she was lovely to look at. Yes, she was a looker. But the attendees delivered the king's command. Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Now, you have to remember, the king is inebriated. He is not in his right mind. He does not have his faculties about him, and neither does anybody else in the party. And so the queen is like, I'm not going out there. He's totally smashed. He's drunk. They're all a bunch of idiots right now. I'm not going to present myself in front of them. So Vashti's disobedience sets a dangerous precedent for women across the empire, because in the eyes of the king, it encourages rebellion. You see, the king of Persia, no one tells him no. That is an answer that you give the king one time, and then you don't do it again because your head is disconnected from your body. And so this is what happens. Verse 13. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king. Here we go with some more names. Karshena, Sethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Mares, Marsena, and Mecunim, the 7 nobles of Persia and Media who had special access to the king and were the highest in the kingdom. These are his cabinet, okay? These are his royal advisors. Verse 15, according to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. When Memucan replied to the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but against the nobles and the people in all the provinces of King Xerxes. They just pour it on there. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she should not come. This very day, the Persian and the Median women in the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way, and there will be no end to the disrespect or discord. Wow, they really enjoyed playing that out, didn't they? Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree. Now, you need to understand something. If there's a written royal decree from a Persian king, once it's done, not even the king himself can undo it. This is going to set the stage for the context of this entire book, okay? So if the king issues a decree, you can't undo the decree. You can't be like, well, let's just take it to Congress, and if we have a 2/3 majority vote, we can reverse. No, it doesn't matter. Once law, it is law, and it's not changeable. Not by that king or any other king. So let him issue a royal decree to be written in the laws of the Persian Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. So she's getting deposed. Verse 20. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all this vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. These guys they must not be married. I don't think they understand how respect works with women. The king and the nobles were pleased with this advice. You know, there's no women that are advising in here, obviously. These are a bunch of dudes making up ideas. And I just want you to know, when a bunch of guys get together, our IQ decreases vastly. So the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all the parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, proclaiming in each people's tongue that every man should be the ruler over his own household. So here's what happens. They have this battle. He's excited. They throw a giant party. There's no limitations to the party. The king gets totally drunk. He's like, hey, let's have a good idea. Let's have the queen come out and present herself. And the queen's like, you're an idiot. I'm not coming. No, you're all drunk. You're not going to make fun of me. And the queen is not supposed to do these types of public appearances, especially in the case of a bunch of guys who are drunk. And so she's like, I'm not doing it. And he's like, you're a horrible queen, and we're going to depose you, and we're going to give your crown to somebody else. This is a bad idea. And now all the women are going to disrespect their husbands, but not anymore, because we're going to show them who's boss. And this is how the king lived his life. Enter God. God is not mentioned anywhere in here. He is unseen, and yet he is unstoppable in what he's going to do. In the midst of all of the insanity, God is going to do something amazing. And what I love about this is that even when you don't see God working, and I hear people say sometimes, they're like, I just don't feel the presence of God. I mean, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, so let me just tell you, God is omnipresent. That means he's everywhere, always, all the time. Okay? So it doesn't really matter what you feel. Know that God is already working. Our missionaries are going to a sensitive country. Let me tell you something. God is already there. He's already in dreams of people, waiting for someone to say, there are many, many dreams of Muslims who are sitting here going, Isa, which is how you say Jesus in Arabic. Isa, he came to me in a dream. My buddy Andy was talking about his trip to Morocco, and he was talking about a dream, and the guy is now pastoring a church, and he's this outcast, and he goes, no missionary came to him. God was already working. No one felt anything. God was already in the midst. So we have this setting set up at the beginning of Esther. Let me tell you, God may not be named, but his fingerprints are over every single part. We saw God allow for the removal of one authority through what seems coincidence, but his invisible hand is at work to do something even greater. And so here's what happens for the search for the new queen. We're going to read chapter 2 together. Later, when the anger of the king had subsided, he remembered Vashti, and it kind of means like thought about her again, and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. And then the king's personal attendees proposed, let a search be made for all the beautiful virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. That's the capital city. Then let them be placed under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let the beauty treatments be given to them. Let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And this advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. The king's decree gathered women for all this consideration. And although it seems like a political and cultural event, we begin to see God orchestrating something very deep because of who ends up coming to this level of authority. Verse 5, now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai. Everybody say Mordecai. Son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiachin, the king of Judah. That's the last king of Judah. Sometimes he's also called Jeconiah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah. Everybody say Hadassah. Whom he brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and features, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So they died in the whole exile process. When the king's order and the edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the citadel of Susan, put under the care of Hegai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Hegai, who had charge of the harem. The girl pleased him and won his favor immediately. He provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 maids selected from the king's palace and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. But every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening. I need to fill in some blanks that I think we gloss over with this. See, Mordecai, that's his Babylonian name. We don't know his Hebrew name, is Hadassah's older cousin. So he's old enough to basically take her like his cousin. And her Esther is her Babylonian name. He raises her. They're part of the Jewish exile population from Babylonia. If you ever read 2 Kings 24:14, it tells you that only the Jewish upper class was carried away into exile. Therefore, we can assume that Mordecai and Hadassah's ancestors are either from Jewish royal family or they're from the Jewish upper class. All the poor, all of the destitute of Jerusalem, they were just left to basically work the fields in Israel at the time. But the people that were killed and the people that were taken in exile were the most influential population. So the fact that his family line is listed here and he's a part of that group lets you know that they're from an influential part of family amongst the Jews. It makes sense also then why she's included in the search for a new queen. She's not only beautiful, but she's part of an aristocratic family. She likely lived in an upper class section of the society, and this is also likely why Mordecai is allowed to access the citadel of Susa as well. It's not like he's just some exile, whatever, but it's been generations. They've grown up, and they have lived in Persia for a long time, and now he has access to a very close place where the queen and her harem is going to be. We need to remember that God can and will grant favor, even in foreign and uncertain times, to see his will accomplished. What he's looking for is actually obedience. When we were on the missions field, I had a conversation with someone because we did campus ministry and we were also doing Bible training for colleges in Bolivia. The Bolivian people are amazing people, lovely, warm, kind people. The Bolivian government is insane and they hate America. And it always made all the legal stuff we had to do really difficult. And there was a day I was at a Bible training, a Bible teacher's training thing, and I was teaching a class to a bunch of Bible school directors. And there was one guy there who actually was able to get, years ago in the 90s, a Bible college started. It was the only legally recognized Bible college in Bolivia. And the Bolivian government was pushing it to where if you wanted to have a church, your pastor had to have a legal recognized degree in some sort of Bible theology or ministry. So all these pastors were really encouraged, not just because they want to know more about Bible and theology, but they also wanted to legally be able to keep their churches open. And so they were wanting to have training. And so we were trying to get distance education going and training pastors so they didn't have to leave to travel to a Bible college. And in Latin America, it's a 5-year degree because you got to do 4 years of college and then you have to do a year-long thesis after that. And so it's not easy. It's like, hey, let me just leave my church for 5 years, hope it's still there, figure out how to support myself, and then I will come back eventually after Bible school. And I'm talking to this Bible school, the president of this other Bible school who's a missionary, and he says, Jeremiah, you just need to give up. He felt threatened by it. I'm like, it's the two of us doing this is like 2 fleas fighting over a horse. Like there's so much need. And he's like, you just need to give up. You're never going to get this to work. And then I got a phone call from a friend and she said, hey, Jeremiah, there's a guy who wants to meet you. And he wanted to ask about Global University, which is the Assemblies of God's distance education program. And that's what I was trying to get going for these pastors. And he's on his way. He's from the city of Potosi, which is like 3 hours away. And he's going to come meet you. Do you have time to meet? And I said, yes, because I was in a different city too. I said, but I'm flying home to the other city in Bolivia. I said, I'm leaving around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I can meet him for lunch. Can he meet me in the main plaza in the city? And they said, yes. So we meet with him. There's this older gentleman, and he's asking all these questions about Global University. And I'm like sitting here going, and I literally just had this conversation. An hour later, I'm having lunch with this guy, and he goes, would you ever think about trying to get this legally recognized by the Bolivian government? I'm like, yes, that's the dream. I go, but that's never going to happen. I'm a foreigner, and how am I ever going to get this off the ground? And he goes, but like if you had like a meeting with the Minister of Education of the government, would you do it? I'm like, well, yeah, duh, yes, of course. He goes, cool, I'll text him right now. And this 75-year-old man, his name is Panfilo Yapu, very Incan name, is the former vice or assistant, whatever you call it, Minister of Education of the country of Bolivia. He was a drunk. He was from a really small town, and he found Jesus in an evening church service in an Assembly of God church. He was healed. He was freed of his alcoholism. He was filled with the Holy Spirit, saved all in the same night. And God changed his life. And he said, I started this distance education thing in the mail way back in the 90s because I just wanted to learn more about Jesus. It was called Global University. But then it stopped. There was a missionary who was trying to get it going, and I heard you were doing it. And we were doing, everything's digital now. And I said, yeah. And he goes, I would love to see this. And he goes, when I was Vice Minister of Education, my focus was how do we get distance education working for K-12 education for kids who live out in the countryside in Bolivia. It's a very poor country. And he goes, I would love this for higher education. A month and a half later, I have the president of Global University and a couple other people, myself and Pamphilo, sitting in a meeting face-to-face with the Minister of Education and the National Director for Universities for the country. We're giving them a Bible. They were excited. We're having this whole conversation. And a month and a half later, American Global University degrees, which are accredited in the United States, are now accredited in the Bolivian government. God was already working. I didn't do anything. I just said, God, I don't know how this is going to happen, and I know this is what you told me to do, so I'm going to work my butt off, but I need you to do the impossible. And God is sitting here going, just watch, because I have all this figured out, all the impossible stuff. And that's exactly what's going to happen with Hadassah, with Esther. God is already working in the midst. And I'm like, Dad, I'm some dumb kid from Squim. I'm not a pastor's kid. I'm not a missionary kid. I just try to say yes to Jesus. And God's like, that's all I need. Just say yes. Just say yes. I will work out the rest. So then Esther goes into a year of preparation. You see, this is verse 12, before a young woman's turn came to go to the king Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments. Ladies, that's a lot of spa visits. Prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shazgaz. I think that's how you say it. There's some fun names in here. The king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. So this is a 12-month beautification process, symbolizes a season of preparation before purpose. It's likely that this had to do with exfoliation treatments, diet, exercise, fittings, hair treatments over time to prepare these women for their presentation. But don't get lost in all of this. We have to remember that God often takes time to prepare us before placing us in a position of influence. It may not be beauty treatments, but that was just the tool that God used for Esther's placement. Maybe for you it's character, personality, a skill set, wisdom, relationship development, etc. You see, God is working even if things appear in the mundane. In the midst of everything, you go, oh, wow, now that I have been through this experience or I've been through this training, God opens a door for me to share about him in this new area. So don't read over that and just be like, oh, look at the beauty treatments for Esther. Isn't that so great? She got a year of going to the spa. That's not what this is. God is working in things that even seem mundane. Verse 15, when the turn came for Esther, the young woman that Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, that was the guy who was in charge, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal palace, or the royal residence, in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, and the 7th year of his reign. So it was the 2nd year when Vashti is deposed. It's been 5 years by the time Esther's actually in front of the king. To us, we think, oh yeah, Vashti's gone, and the next day Esther walks in. No. And sometimes we're like, how come God just takes his time? I'm like, Abraham was 75 when he got started. Moses was 80. Some of you guys are like, yep, my time's over. You're like 80. I'm like, you're just getting started, brother. God has his own timing. Unlike the others, Esther does not rely on her external beauty alone, but she listens to wise counsel from Mordecai, from the eunuch in charge of the ladies. But her favor actually comes from God, not from manipulation and not from self-promotion. She says, okay, what do I need to do? And enters with a humble heart. Verse 18, the king gave a great banquet, and Esther's banquet, for all the nobles and the officials, and he proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. A celebration follows Esther's coronation, though she remains unaware of her divine assignment. This is a direct comparison to the banquet where the previous queen, Vashti, refused to appear. But now God's timing begins to reveal itself. See, sometimes we can step into a calling before understanding its full purpose. Esther had no idea what God was up to. It's likely that neither do you. You may be in the midst of something that doesn't seem spiritual, but God is using it for his ultimate plan. When my family and I decided in April of 2020, what a wonderful year to decide, to come back to America permanently after 10 years on the mission field, it was hard for us to make that decision. We had an amazing ministry and an amazing life in Bolivia. We were happy. We were not looking to come back to America. But God spoke to us. And so we said, okay, we're going back. And here's the issue. Assembly God World Missions does not have a box for us when we said, hey, we're coming back. They're like, well, you're not in sin, you're not dead, you're not retiring, and you're not taking a pastorate. We don't know what to do with you. What's wrong with you guys? We're like, nothing's wrong. We're listening to God. Just like God spoke to us to go to the missions field back in 2003, God was speaking to us, it's time to go back to America. Your new missions field. And so we moved back to America, and we moved to this weird little town that we didn't know about called Monroe. And I took a job teaching in a public school in Bothell, and Marge took a job teaching in Monroe. And we weren't doing full-time ministry. And I had all these seminary degrees and training and experience, and I wasn't putting it to work. And all of our friends were like, what's wrong with you guys? Is your marriage fine? Are you really okay? We're like, we're fine. We're trying to learn to live in Western Washington after living in a third world country, and we're totally broke because, we could live on $20,000 a year and just be fine. Here, that's far below the poverty line. We're like, how are we going to feed our family? And we thought, oh, this is what's going to happen. We had our other plans of what God was going to do. And I remember Marjorie even asked me, she goes, would you be open to pastoring a church? And I go, no way. No way. When Pastor David talked to me about stepping into this role to be the lead pastor of our church, and we sat down, we were at Monroe Coffee Company in Monroe, and he tells me about this, hey, this is real secret, and I have this succession plan that I want to do. And I'm like, okay, great, we'll help you. Whatever we can do to help you with this plan. Who are you thinking about? We're thinking, we know a bunch of pastors and all this stuff. And he goes, you. And I go, no, just like that, in the middle of the coffee shop. No way. And I offended David, and I felt bad later. I didn't realize it, but I was just like, not on my radar. And Pastor David, being, very wise, he goes, well, will you pray about it? And I'm like, don't ask me that. God might say yes. And we thought we knew why we were moving to Monroe and had all these other plans. And God's like, you're so funny. You're so cute. You think you know what's going on. You have no clue what's going on, Jeremiah. And Esther thinks she knows what's going on. And God's going, you have no clue what you're doing, Esther, but I do. And oftentimes we think we know why we're doing certain things. And God is saying, that's cute. You think you know why you're doing this, but I have something totally different planned. I just want you to step in obedience. Watch me work. The question is are you going to walk in obedience? Because God may ask you to do something that takes you outside of your comfort zone. And it may not be cool or glamorous or glorious. It is for Esther. But that's actually not what it's about. The question is, will you say yes to what God is asking you to do? Period. That's what our missionaries are doing. They're saying yes. And they're going to a very scary place. Because God said so. Because God said, this is what I want you to do. And they said, okay, we'll do it. My life is in your hands. Verse 19, when the virgins were assembled the second time, Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do. For she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. The fact that Mordecai is even sitting at the king's gate, demonstrates that he has a position of leadership and authority to some level in the empire. And fortunately, Esther has been able to maintain the secrecy of her Jewish identity up till now. And it shows that she has not forgotten her cousin, even with her ascent to the throne. I think about so many people who make it big, and especially singers, they're easy to pick on. And they grow up singing in church, and that's where they develop that skill set. And they go on and they become famous, and you see what the world does and just corrupts them as a human being. And they forget who they are. They forget where they're from. They walk away from their relationship with God because, things are glittery and what, money can do and how it can corrupt people. Money doesn't actually corrupt people. It just exposes, magnifies sin issues that are already there. But in the midst of all of that, Esther is elevated to become the queen in the most powerful nation and empire on the planet at the time. But she doesn't forget where she's from. She doesn't forget who she is. And she doesn't forget about her call. See, God places his people in specific positions for his purposes. Don't forget those who had influence in your life before you got there. There's a pastor, I won't name him. Some of you guys even went to his church years ago in the Seattle area. And he made a comment one time. There was a pastor friend of his that was a mentor for him. And this pastor grew to really big prominence, big stage. And he said, I'm not going to listen to you because you don't pastor enough people to have influence in my life. You're not a big enough name. And I'm like, can I just stand back because lightning's about to start flying? I'm sorry. You got too big for your britches, buddy. It's easy for people to do that. And it's not just singers. They're easy to pick on. That because we see that in front of us. But honestly, this happens to people all the time. You get to a place where you start to rely on yourself and your own abilities. We have a very special word for that. It's called pride. By the way, that's what caused Satan to fall. That's what caused Adam and Eve to fall. Eat the fruit and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Yes, I will do that then. We do the same thing. We let pride get in the way, but Esther holds that at bay. We too, we should hold that at bay. Never, ever forget who you are or where God has brought you. At the end of the chapter 2, it says, during that time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. So Mordecai's sitting there, right? And he found out about the plot, and he told Queen Esther, who in turn reported to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found out to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. That's a great way of public deterrent. All this was recorded in the book of the annals of the king, in the presence of the king. So Mordecai overhears, and the end of the second chapter kind of ends with this cliffhanger moment to be continued. But Mordecai overhears this plot against the king. He reports it to his cousin, who's now the queen. But his loyalty actually goes unnoticed for now. But you need to remember that faithfulness to God's plan often involves acts of obedience that are not immediately rewarded. God's timing is perfect, and our obedience is never, ever wasted. You're going to see how God, as we walk through this book, God's fingerprints is on every single part of what is happening in this story. I wanted to share a quote. Many of you guys are Bible nerds like I am in here, and there's a very famous commentary, an old commentary. It's called Matthew Henry, his commentary. When he writes about Esther in the introduction, he writes this line about the book of Esther in his commentary. He says, though that it's older, so his language is a little bit different, but he says, though the name of God be not in it, the finger of God is, directing many minute events for the bringing about of his people's deliverance. You see, the entire story of Esther, even though God is not named, his fingerprints are all throughout the story. And oftentimes in our lives, you don't see God working, but his fingerprints are all over your life. Are you willing to acknowledge it? Or is it, oh, what a great coincidence? Let me just tell you, there's no coincidence with God. There's not. But you recognize that God is oftentimes placing you in situations, and sometimes even hardship. It's not just, oh, cool things happen, that's from God. Yes, and seemingly bad things happen too, and sometimes God is allowing that to happen because he is allowing you to grow or putting you into a situation and allowing him to be glorified in the midst of all of it. And even things that are not part of his design, and I shared this a little while ago, my wife and I, while we were in Bolivia, suffered our first miscarriage. We've had 2 miscarriages in our family between our kids. And it was angry and difficult and heart-wrenching. And I know that many of you ladies in here have had that as well. And it's a horrible thing. And yet in the midst of the healing that has come from that, and I'm not saying God did that. Part of it is just we're humans and we had the flu last week and things happen. And yet in the midst of something that was devastating to our family, God has allowed that and that healing that he allowed Marjorie to go through to be a source of her providing comfort to other women when they walk through those difficult situations. So even in the midst of the difficult things that you walk through, even though God is not necessarily doing those things, he can allow what would be a stumbling block in your life to be a stepping stone for something else, for his glory. The question is this. Esther said yes. Now, she may not have had as much choice as we think, but she said yes to say, okay, I will go through this process. I will see if this is what God wants me to do. Even though she's in exile in a foreign land with foreign people, God's favor rested on her because she said yes. We saw God's favor rest on us on the missions field in Bolivia because we said yes, not because we have some special skill set. We have some skills to offer. Yes, that's great, but it had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with what God wanted. And my question for us today is, are you willing to say yes to what God is asking you to do? And even though you may not feel God, even though you may not see his hand at work, it does not mean he is not there, because he is. So I want to give us an opportunity this morning as we close. I'm going to have the worship team come up. And as we sing, some of us, we just need to do business with Jesus today. God is asking you to do something, but he's not looking for someone who has a special skill set. He's looking for someone who's obedient. You see, God does not call the qualified. He qualifies those who are called. He is going to give you the tools that you need to accomplish the task that he put before you. And so I want to give you that time, that opportunity. And for those of you guys who are married couples, I want you to have a conversation today as you pray. What is God asking our family to do? That is a hard question to ask sometimes. That's a question my wife had to, and I had to ask when we started dating about going to Bolivia. That was a question we had to ask when we came back from Bolivia. That was a question we had to ask about saying yes to this church. That's a question we have to ask on a regular basis, actually. God, what do you want? And I shared this before recently, but it's really been impacting me, and I think a lot of it is because it has to do with even Esther's story. But our superintendent, Pastor Don Ross, recently shared this, and it has really been chewing in my heart, and it's very applicable for today. But he said, he was talking to missionaries as he said this. He says, your life is God's to spend however he sees fit. That is such an anti-American mindset. Your life belongs to the Lord. And it is his to spend however he sees fit. Andy's my best friend. He preached last Sunday. We have a third friend, though. The three of us are very tight. We talk almost every day online. His name is Drew. And Drew is a chaplain in the United States Army. Drew is in the midst of getting ready for new orders, and he works in D.C., and he's getting ready for his new orders, and he doesn't know where his family is going to go. He has 2 beautiful daughters and a wife, and he's going to get shipped somewhere around this world and has no clue. And he has no problem with that because he understands that as an officer in the United States Army, his life legally is not his own. He is the property of the United States Army. And his life belongs to the Army to spend however it sees fit. It is not dissimilar with God. Your life is not your own. It belongs to God. And the question is, are you going to say, God, what do you want? Not what do I want? God, what do you want? And that may mean something as simple as, I want you to spend time with that person at the coffee shop. I want you to spend some time with that person at work. I want you to be obedient and share your story about me, you and Jesus. Because that friend that you've made, they need to hear it. They're struggling. It doesn't mean that you have to go across the world to Western Sahara. For some people, yes. And if that is the case, you need to be at the altar today. But sometimes it's just as simple as, are you willing to say yes where Jesus has placed you right now? So I want to invite you guys to stand as we worship this morning. And some of you need to do some business this morning with Jesus. So I want to challenge you. If that's the case, come to the altar, spend some time in prayer. Richard's one of our board members over here. He's willing to pray with you. He's our prayer partner. Lori's over here. She's willing to pray with you as well. Prayer warriors. If you want someone to pray with you, spend some time doing business with Jesus before you go today. God, our life is in your hands, just like Esther was. The circumstances are different, but your call never changes. And God, I know that you are working even though we don't see you and even though we don't feel you, and it doesn't matter because you are here right now working. God, would you work in our hearts? Would you continue to call us to be about your business? Jesus, help us be uncomfortable because it's in those moments that we begin to move in obedience. That's all you want. Help us to walk in obedience, Jesus. Amen. Let's worship.